Korean Mafia boss froze at anniversary dinner with his wife. His black ex-girlfriend walked in with Triplet Girls Part 2. 5 years had passed since Kang Min-ho disappeared from Seoul without a trace. 5 years since he'd traded power for anonymity, fear for love, empire for family. Vancouver's coastline stretched before him, the morning mist settling over the water like a silk shroud. From the balcony of their beachfront home, Min-ho watched as 3 10-year-old girls raced along the shore, their identical faces alight with the careless joy of childhood. They wore matching yellow raincoats against the autumn chill, but each had personalized her outfit in ways that revealed their distinct personalities. Mina with a book tucked under her arm, Jia with her ever-present camera hanging from her neck, Sora with mud-splattered boots from her latest adventure. The transformation still amazed him sometimes. How Kang Min-ho, the Shadow King of Seoul's underworld, had become Michael Kim, successful investment consultant with a quiet life and a family he adored. The new name felt natural now, the old identity fading like a half-remembered nightmare. "They're growing too fast," Zara said, joining him on the balcony. She handed him a steaming cup of coffee, their fingers brushing in the familiar ritual they developed over years of cautious reconciliation. "I know." His voice carried the weight of both gratitude and regret. Gratitude for these years he might never have known, regret for the ones he'd missed before. Zara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched their daughters. The morning light caught the simple platinum band on her finger, a reminder of the small ceremony they'd held 2 years ago on this very beach, the girls serving as flower girls and witnesses as their parents finally formalized the bond that had survived betrayal, separation, and reinvention. The journey hadn't been easy. After fleeing Seoul, they'd spent the first year moving between safe houses, never staying in one place long enough to leave traces. Vancouver had been their final destination. Far enough from Korea to be safe, cosmopolitan enough for a mixed-race family to blend in without questions, stable enough to give the girls the normal childhood they deserved. Their relationship had evolved slowly, painfully at times. Trust rebuilt brick by brick, forgiveness offered in small increments as Zara watched Min-ho become the father he'd promised to be. The separate bedrooms of the first year had eventually given way to a tentative reunion, to rediscovered passion tempered by hard-earned wisdom, to the marriage ceremony witnessed only by their daughters and the Pacific Ocean. Mina's science project won first place, Zara murmured against his shoulder. The teacher wants her to present it at the district competition next month. Pride swelled in Min-ho's chest. Of course she did. She spent 3 weeks perfecting that solar power demonstration. And Jia's photography was selected for the school art exhibition. Even the principal commented on her remarkable eye for composition. "She sees the world differently," Min-ho agreed, watching as Jia crouched at the shoreline, her camera focused on something most would overlook, perhaps the way light fractured through a piece of sea glass, or how tiny crabs scuttled between rocks. "It's a gift." "Sora's teacher called again yesterday," Zara added, her tone shifting to concern. "Another playground incident." Min-ho sighed. Of the 3, Sora had always been the most challenging. Fearless to the point of recklessness, fiercely protective of her sisters, quick to confront any perceived injustice with a directness that often landed her in trouble. What happened this time? An older boy was teasing Jia about her accent. Sora decided the appropriate response was to push him into a mud puddle. The girls had grown up speaking both English and Korean. Min-ho's insistence, his small way of honoring the heritage they'd left behind. But Jia's slight accent had sometimes made her a target for classroom cruelty, and Sora had appointed herself protector of her more sensitive sister. "She gets that from me," Min-ho admitted, the warrior instincts he'd hoped wouldn't manifest in his children already showing in his fearless middle daughter. The instinct to protect what's hers, to meet threats with immediate force. "Yes, well, your former approach to conflict resolution isn't exactly appropriate for the 5th grade, Zara replied dryly, though there was no real reproach in her voice. They both understood that their daughters carried parts of them. Both the parts they celebrated and the parts they wished might have remained dormant. The peaceful morning shattered as Mina came racing up the beach path, Panic etched across her face. Dad! Mom! Someone's taking pictures of us from the road. Minho's body tensed, 5 years of careful vigilance crystallizing into action. He scanned the road beyond their property, eyes narrowed against the sun. Nothing visible now, but Mina's observation skills were rarely wrong. What did they look like, sweetheart? His voice remained calm, betraying none of the alarm coursing through him. Asian man, black car, big camera with a long lens. Mina's description was precise, detailed. Another trait she'd inherited from him. He drove away when I pointed at him. Zara was already moving, calling the other girls back to the house with a sharpness that broke no argument. Within minutes, they were inside, doors locked, the emergency protocol they'd practiced but never implemented now in full effect. It could be nothing, Zara said quietly as the girls settled in the living room with books and art supplies, trained to stay occupied during what they'd been told were safety drills. A tourist, a real estate photographer, but they both knew better. After 5 years of peace, of believing they'd escaped, of thinking the evidence Minho had left behind had been enough to ensure their safety, after 5 years of becoming a real family, the past had finally found them. I'll call Marcus. Minho moved to the office, closing the door behind him. Marcus had been his only connection to the old life, the only loose thread he'd allowed himself. His former second-in-command had become the head of what remained of the Kong organization. A more legitimate enterprise now, the criminal elements slowly excised as Marcus implemented the changes Minho had once dreamed of making himself. The phone rang 3 times before Marcus answered, his voice cautious. This is an unexpected call. We've been compromised. Minho skipped the pleasantries. Vancouver. Someone photographing the girls. Silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Judge Chun died last year, Marcus finally said. Heart attack during a sentencing. His son has taken his place on the bench. Su Jin. Remarried. American tech executive. Living in California. She seems happy. There was a strange comfort in that knowledge, that the woman he'd abandoned had found her own path forward, had perhaps found the genuine connection their strategic marriage had always lacked. Then who? Minho pressed, the cold weight in his stomach not easing despite the apparent lack of threat from his former wife and in-laws. There have been rumors, Marcus admitted reluctantly. Your father is dying. Cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months at most. He's been asking questions, looking for you, for his grandchildren. Minho's father, the original architect of the Kong Empire, the man who had taught him that power was the only currency that mattered, that family was business and business was everything. The man whose expectations had shaped Minho into the cold, calculating crime lord he'd once been. He has no right to them. The words came out sharper than intended. He's dying, Minho. He wants to meet them before he goes. So he can what? Corrupt them? Groom them to take over the family business? Turn them into what he turned me into? The anger he thought he'd left behind in Seoul roared back to life, scorching his careful facade of normalcy. I don't know what he wants, Marcus answered honestly. I just know he's looking. And if I could find you. The implication hung between them. If Marcus could track them down, others could too. The carefully constructed safety of their new life was an illusion, as fragile as the morning mist over the Vancouver coastline. We'll move again. The decision formed instantly, the survival instincts of his former life resurfacing. New identities, new location. Running won't solve this, Minho. Marcus's voice softened. Not this time. He's dying. Whatever threat he posed is ending with him. You don't know that. But even as he spoke the words, Minho felt the familiar weight of family legacy pressing down on him. The ties that could never fully be severed. The blood that connected him to a man he'd spent a lifetime both emulating and resenting. There's something else you should know, Marcus continued. He's liquidating assets. Significant ones. Setting up trusts. Trusts. Minho's suspicion deepened. For what purpose? I don't have details. but my sources say the beneficiaries are 3 unnamed minors. Females, born on the same date. The implications were clear. His father wasn't just looking for a deathbed reconciliation. He was making financial arrangements for granddaughters he'd never met. Preparations that would outlive him, that would forge connections between his world and theirs long after he was gone. I want those trusts dissolved, Minho ordered, his voice slipping into the commanding tone he'd abandoned 5 years ago. Whatever he's planning, I want it stopped. It may not be that simple, Marcus cautioned. Some of the arrangements are already finalized. Legal, legitimate. Breaking them would require your direct involvement. Your legal identity as Kang Min-ho, not Michael Kim. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. To protect his daughters from his father's posthumous influence, Min-ho would have to reclaim the very identity he'd abandoned to keep them safe. Talk to Zara, Marcus suggested when Min-ho remained silent. Make the decision together. But know this, your father has resources I can't track, connections even I don't know about. If he's found you once, he'll find you again. Maybe it's time to face him. On your terms. After the call ended, Min-ho stood at the window of his office, watching his daughters through the glass as they drew pictures at the dining table, unaware that their peaceful world was once again under threat. Zara moved between them, her smile forced but her hands steady as she helped Jia with her latest art project. This was what he'd sacrificed everything for. This was what he would protect at any cost. This was the legacy that mattered. Not empire, not power, not the Kang family name, but 3 little girls who carried his blood without the burden of his sins. When he emerged from the office, Zara met his eyes across the room, reading the truth there without words. She sent the girls upstairs with quiet instructions to pack overnight bags, just in case, before joining him in the kitchen, out of earshot. How bad? She asked simply. My father. The words tasted strange on his tongue. He rarely spoke of the man who had shaped him, who had taught him that vulnerability was weakness and mercy was foolishness. He's dying. Cancer. He's looking for us. For them. Understanding dawned in Zara's eyes, followed quickly by fierce protection. We'll leave tonight. I still have contacts in Boston. We can. He'll find us again. Min-ho's interruption was gentle but firm. If he found us here, he'll find us anywhere. And there's more. He's setting up trusts for the girls. Financial arrangements that would connect them to him, to the Kang money, long after he's gone. Without our permission? Without our knowledge. Outrage colored her voice. He has no right. Rights have never mattered much to my father, Min-ho replied grimly. Only power. Only control. Only legacy. Zara paced the kitchen, her physician's mind analyzing the problem from all angles, searching for the cleanest solution, the approach with the least potential for damage. What does Marcus suggest? That I meet with him, hear what he wants, set boundaries. And you believe those boundaries would be respected? Skepticism dripped from every word. By a man who spent his life believing rules apply to everyone but him? No. The honesty came easily now, after years of building a marriage on truth rather than convenience. But I believe he's dying, and I believe that changes the calculation. Whatever game he's playing, it has a definite endpoint now. Zara stopped pacing, her eyes finding his across the kitchen. You're considering it. Meeting him. I'm considering ending this. Once and for all. So we don't spend the next decade looking over our shoulders, wondering when the past will catch up to us again. And the girls? What about them? They stay completely out of it until we know what he wants, what he's offering, what threat he might still pose. Min-ho's resolve hardened with each word. I meet him alone first. I make it clear that the girls are off limits, that they will never be part of the family business, that they will never know the world I came from. And if he doesn't accept that? Zara's question cut to the heart of the matter. Then we disappear again. His resolve hardened. But this time we make sure there's nothing left to find. No connections, no loose threads, no way back. The weight of the decision settled between them, Another crossroads in a journey that had begun with a chance meeting in a Boston coffee shop so many years ago. The girls should have a say, Zara said finally. They're old enough now. They deserve to know what we're deciding about their lives. Minho hesitated, the instinct to protect warring with the promise he'd made when they'd fled Seoul, that their new family would be built on truth, not secrets. That his daughters would not inherit the burden of lies that had defined his own childhood. You're right. The admission came easier than it once would have. We'll tell them together. That evening, after dinner, they gathered in the living room. The girls curious, slightly nervous, sensing the undercurrent of tension beneath their parents' calm exteriors. Minho looked at these three faces that combined his features with Zara's. These three miracles he might never have known if fate hadn't intervened that night in the Sapphire Palace. We need to talk to you about something important, he began carefully. About our family history. About who we were before we came to Vancouver. Mina, ever the observant one, straightened. Is this about the man taking pictures? Are we in danger? Not danger, Zara assured them quickly. But it's time you knew more about your father's family. About why we left Korea. Over the next hour, Minho and Zara told a carefully edited version of their history. About a powerful Korean family that didn't approve of their relationship. About a father who had wanted Minho to take over the family business. About their decision to leave everything behind to be together. They explained how they had changed their names, how they had built a new life, how they had chosen freedom over fortune. Your grandfather is very sick, Minho explained gently. He's looking for us because he wants to meet you before he dies. The girls processed this information with varying reactions. Mina thoughtful, Ja tearful, Sora suspicious. Is he a bad man? Sora asked directly, her protectiveness extending beyond her sisters to encompass her parents as well. Minho hesitated, unwilling to lie but unable to explain the complicated truth of who Kang Sung-min truly was. A man who had built an empire through violence and fear, who had taught his son that compassion was weakness, who had valued legacy above love. He made choices I didn't agree with, he said finally. That's why I left. That's why we built a different life here. But he's still family, Jia said softly, her artist's heart always searching for connection, for meaning, for the threads that bound people together across time and space. Yes, Minho acknowledged. He is still family. Do we have to meet him? Mina asked, practical as always, weighing options and consequences. That's what we wanted to discuss with you, Zara explained. Your father is going to meet with him first, alone. After that, we'll decide together what happens next. The democratic approach was new to Minho, so different from the authoritarian structure of his childhood home where decisions were handed down like royal decrees, where questions were met with silence or worse. But this was the family they had built. One where even the youngest members had voices, where choices were explained, where truth was valued above convenience. What if he tries to take us away? Sora's question cut to the heart of Minho's own fears, the nightmare that had haunted him for 5 years. No one is taking you anywhere, he promised, his voice carrying the absolute certainty that had once made hardened criminals tremble. You are ours. You will always be ours. Nothing and no one will ever change that. The girls seemed satisfied with this declaration, their young minds unable to fully grasp the complexities of the situation, but comforted by the unwavering resolve in their father's voice. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Minho and Zara sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean, the vastness of the water matching the weight of the decision they'd made. Are you sure about this? Zara asked, her hand finding his in the darkness. Seeing him again, after everything? Minho considered the question, searching for the truth beneath the layers of fear and resentment and obligation. No, he admitted finally, but I'm sure about wanting this to end, about not spending the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, about the girls knowing their history without being defined by it. And if he wants more than a meeting, if he's planning something, then I'll remind him that I was once his son. Minho's voice hardened. That everything I know about power and leverage and consequences, I learned from him. Zara's hand tightened around his, a silent acknowledgement of the darkness that still lived inside him, carefully contained but never fully exorcised. The capacity for violence, for ruthlessness, for absolute protection of what was his. "Just promise me one thing," she said quietly. "Promise me you'll come back to us as Michael, not as Kang Min-ho." The distinction mattered. Between the man he had been and the man he had become. Between the crime lord who ruled through fear and the father who governed through love. Between the son who had inherited an empire built on blood and the parent determined to give his children a legacy of something better. "I promise." The words were a vow, sealed with the truth of 5 years of rebuilding, of redemption, of choosing a different path with every decision, every day. 3 days later, Min-ho stood in the lobby of the Fairmont Pacific Rim, his body tensed with the hyper-awareness that had once kept him alive in a world of enemies. The luxury hotel had been chosen for its anonymity, neutral ground where two powerful men could meet without drawing attention. He'd come alone against Zara's objections, unwilling to risk anyone else being present for what might unfold. The girls believed he was on a business trip, a necessary fiction to protect them from the anxiety of waiting. When the elevator doors opened, Min-ho recognized his father instantly, despite the changes 5 years and illness had wrought. Kang Sung-min had once been a force of nature, tall, imposing, radiating the quiet menace that had built the Kang Empire from nothing. Now he moved with the assistance of a cane, his once broad shoulders diminished, his face gaunt from cancer treatments. But his eyes, those remained unchanged, cold, calculating, assessing, missing nothing. The eyes that had taught Min-ho to see the world as a series of opportunities and threats, advantages and weaknesses. 2 security men flanked him, their stiff posture and watchful gazes marking them as professionals. Min-ho noted their positioning, the subtle bulge of shoulder holsters, the way they scanned the lobby continuously, habits from his former life that had never fully disappeared. His father dismissed them with a sharp gesture as he approached, a private conversation between blood requiring no witnesses. Min-ho. The familiar voice was rougher now, weakened by illness but still carrying the authority that had shaped dynasties and destroyed rivals. "Or do you prefer Michael now?" The casual revelation that his father knew not just his location but his new identity sent a chill through Min-ho's veins. The old man's network remained as effective as ever, even as he approached death's door. "Father." He kept his voice neutral, betraying none of the turmoil beneath the surface. "You're looking well," a lie they both recognized. Kang Sung-min was dying, his once powerful body betraying him in ways that violence and enemies never could. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries." His father gestured toward the hotel restaurant. "I've reserved a private room." They walked in silence, the distance between them measured in more than footsteps. 5 years of absence, a lifetime of expectations, generations of legacy balanced against the fragile new life Min-ho had built from the ashes of his old one. The private dining room offered views of the harbor, the same ocean that stretched to Korea's shores thousands of miles away, a physical reminder of the distance Min-ho had put between himself and his birthright. As they sat across from each other, Min-ho studied the man who had shaped him, for better and worse, searching for signs of weakness, for clues to his true purpose. What he saw instead surprised him: uncertainty, an emotion he'd never associated with Kang Sung-min. "You have daughters." His father spoke first, the statement heavy with implication. 3 of them, identical, beautiful girls. Min-ho's hands clenched beneath the table, the only outward sign of the protective rage that flared at the casual mention of his children. "Why are you here, father? What do you want? Is it so hard to believe that a dying man might want to meet his grandchildren before he goes?" A hint of the old manipulation colored his voice. That he might want to make peace with his only son? "Yes." Min-ho kept his response simple, direct. "It is hard to believe. You taught me that sentimentality is weakness, that family is useful only as far as it serves the business, that legacy matters more than love. And look where those lessons led." His father's laugh turned into a cough, his body shaking with the effort. To this moment, two strangers with the same blood, sitting in a foreign country, negotiating like enemies. We've always negotiated like enemies. The truth slipped out before Minho could stop it. Years of resentment crystallized in a single sentence. His father didn't deny it. His silence and acknowledgement more honest than any words could have been. After a moment, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a slim envelope, placing it on the table between them. "Open it," he directed when Minho made no move to touch it. Cautiously, Minho complied, half expecting documents, threats, evidence. The currency of the world he'd left behind. Instead, he found photographs. Old, fading prints from his own childhood. Minho at 5, sitting on his grandfather's lap. At 7, standing proudly beside his father after winning a martial arts competition. At 10, serious-faced in his first tailored suit. "Why are you showing me these?" The question came out sharper than intended, defensive against the unexpected intrusion of memories he'd buried long ago. "Because I thought I was doing right by you." His father's voice carried an unfamiliar emotion, regret, perhaps, or something close to it. "I thought I was preparing you for the world as I understood it. A world where strength was the only protection, where power was the only security, where family legacy was the only immortality worth having." Minho stared at him, searching for the manipulation behind the apparent confession. "And now? Has cancer suddenly changed your worldview?" "Cancer changes everything." The blunt statement hung between them. It strips away pretense, clarifies priorities. It reveals the emptiness of empire when faced with the certainty of its end. "So this is about your mortality, not about me. Not about my family." The accusation contained all the disappointment of a lifetime of conditional love. "It's about both." His father leaned forward, the movement clearly causing him pain he refused to acknowledge. "I'm dying, Minho. Whatever I built, whatever I thought mattered, it all ends with me. You made sure of that when you left." The implication was clear. The Kong Empire had diminished in Minho's absence, Marcus's attempts at legitimacy changing its nature if not its reach. The dynasty had faltered, the succession interrupted. "I don't regret leaving." The declaration contained no apology, no concession. "I know." His father's acceptance came as a surprise. "I wouldn't respect you if you did. You made your choice and stood by it no matter the cost. In that, at least, you are truly my son." The comparison should have angered him, but Minho felt only a strange, distant sadness, for the relationship they might have had in another life, for the father who might have valued him for more than his usefulness to the family business, for the son who might have found a way to honor tradition without sacrificing his soul. "What do you want from me?" Minho asked again, cutting through the emotions to the practical heart of their meeting. "Why track us down after all this time?" "I want to meet them." The simple request carried the weight of dynasty, of bloodline, of the tangled web of heritage that couldn't be escaped even by crossing oceans. "My granddaughters. I want to see them once before I die. They know nothing of that world. Nothing of what the Kong name means in certain circles. Nothing of how that empire was built or maintained." Minho's eyes hardened. "And they never will. I'm not asking to bring them into that world," his father countered, an edge of impatience breaking through his careful control. "I'm asking for a single meeting, a chance to see my own blood, to give them something that is their birthright, whether you want it or not. They have no birthright in your world." Minho's rejection was absolute. "They will never be part of what you built. They will never know the things I had to do, the person I had to become, to be your son and heir. Not the business." His father waved a dismissive hand. "That died when you left. What Marcus runs now is a shadow of what we built, legitimate but ordinary, respectable but unremarkable." The casual dismissal of his former empire should have been shocking, but Minho recognized it as the truth. The Kong organization had been built on his father's ruthlessness and Minho's strategic vision. Without both, it had become just another business, noteworthy only for its history rather than its future. I've established trusts for them, his father continued, confirming Marcus's information. Not connected to the business. Clean money, their education, their futures, their security, all provided for. We don't need your money. Minho's rejection was instinctive. I've built a life for them without the Kong fortune. This isn't about need. It's about what's theirs by right of blood. His father's expression hardened momentarily, a glimpse of the formidable man who had built an empire through sheer force of will. You can reject me, reject the business, reject the name, but their connection to our family exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Financial connections can be severed, Minho countered. Legal arrangements dissolved. At what cost? His father's shrewd gaze missed nothing. Reclaiming your identity as Kong Minho? Stepping back into the very world you fled? Exposing your daughters to exactly what you've been protecting them from. The trap was elegant, precise. Exactly what Minho would have expected from the man who had taught him strategy. To protect his daughters from his father's financial influence, he would have to become Kong Minho again, if only temporarily. To maintain their separation from their grandfather's world, he would have to acknowledge their connection to it. What else? Minho demanded, certain there was more. There was always more with his father. Kong Sungmin reached into his pocket again, this time withdrawing a small wooden box, aged and worn, the lacquer cracked in places. He placed it on the table with a reverence Minho had rarely seen him display. This belonged to your grandmother. Her mother brought it from Korea during the Japanese occupation, hidden in her clothes, the only thing of value she managed to save. Minho knew the story, one of the few pieces of family history that had been shared with him, a tale of resilience and survival that had shaped the Kong family's determination to never again be powerless, to never again lose what was theirs. Inside are 3 jade pendants, his father continued, traditionally passed from grandmother to granddaughter. Your mother wore one on our wedding day. She would have wanted your daughters to have them. The mention of his mother, dead before Minho had reached adulthood, the only softness in his childhood lost too soon, broke through defenses he hadn't realized he still maintained. This is what you came for? To give them jewelry? Disbelief competed with suspicion. To give them history, heritage, a connection to the women who came before them, who survived war and occupation and poverty so that they could exist. His father's voice strengthened with conviction. You can reject me, reject the business, reject everything I built. But don't deny them their history. It belongs to them as much as it belongs to you. Minho stared at the box, understanding its significance beyond the material value of its contents. This wasn't about empire or legacy in the way he'd feared. This was about blood, about lineage, about the stories that connected generations across time and space and circumstance. If I agree to this and I haven't decided that I will, it happens on my terms. Minho's voice hardened into the tone he'd once used to command an empire. One meeting, public place. No security, no entourage, no discussion of the family business. You meet them as their grandfather, nothing more. You tell them nothing of our past and soul, nothing of what you built, nothing of what I left behind. His father considered the conditions, weighing them against his diminishing time. Agreed, he said finally. One meeting, on your terms. And after that, we're done. You never contact us again. You never look for us again. You let us live our lives without the shadow of the Kong name hanging over us. The request seemed to age his father further, the finality of it more devastating than any business setback had ever been. For a moment, Minho glimpsed the lonely old man beneath the fearsome patriarch, dying without legacy, without heir, without the dynasty he had sacrificed everything to build. If that's what you want. The concession came reluctantly, painfully. But know this, Minho, whatever sins you believe I committed in raising you, whatever damage you think I caused, it was never without love. A twisted, imperfect love, perhaps, but love nonetheless. The declaration hung between them, impossible to accept fully, impossible to reject completely. The complicated truth of family. that love and harm often came from the same hands, that good intentions could lead to lasting damage, that blood connections remained even when all other bonds were severed. "I'll talk to Zara," Minho said finally. "The decision will be hers as much as mine. The girls will have a say as well. If they don't want to meet you, that's the end of it." His father nodded, accepting these terms with a dignity Minho had not expected. "Fair enough." He pushed the wooden box across the table. "Take this regardless of your decision. It belongs to them, to your mother's line." Minho hesitated, then took the box, its weight in his hand connecting him to generations of women he had never known, to a history that was his daughter's birthright regardless of his own choices. As they prepared to leave, his father paused, studying Minho with eyes that had lost none of their sharpness despite his declining health. "You look well," he said finally. "Fatherhood suits you better than empire ever did." The observation, so simple, so obvious, yet never acknowledged between them, struck Minho with unexpected force. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "It does." For a moment, something like understanding passed between them. Two men shaped by the same blood, but choosing different paths, recognizing in each other both the shadows of what had been and the possibilities of what might have been. Then the moment passed, and they were once again Kang Sung-min and the son who had rejected his legacy, separated by choices that could never be unmade and consequences that could never be undone. As Minho watched his father depart, leaning more heavily on his cane than he had on arrival, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Not just his own history but the generations before him, the complex web of choices and circumstances that had led to this moment. The wooden box sat in his pocket, heavy with more than its physical presence. Inside were not just jade pendants but connections to a past his daughters had never known, to women whose blood ran in their veins, to a heritage that was theirs by birth if not by choice. Minho had fled Seoul to protect his family from his father's world. Now, 5 years later, he faced a different challenge. Protecting them not from danger but from the loss of their own history, from the erasure of the parts of their identity that, for better or worse, had shaped the father they knew and loved. The decision, when it came, surprised even Minho. After a long family discussion, honest, open, with all voices heard, they agreed to the meeting. Mina's curiosity about her heritage, Jia's natural empathy for a dying man, and even Sora's protective instinct, "I want to see what kind of man made Dad leave Korea," all pointed toward the same conclusion. They would meet Kang Sung-min once, together, on their terms. Stanley Park was chosen for its public setting and natural beauty, neutral ground that belonged to no one. Minho arrived first with Zara and the girls, selecting a quiet area near the rose garden where privacy was possible without isolation. When his father arrived, Minho felt the girls tense beside him, their identical faces showing different aspects of the same emotion, apprehension mixed with curiosity. Zara stood slightly behind them, her hand on Minho's shoulder, a silent reminder of the promise he'd made. To remain Michael, not to slip back into being Kang Minho, not to let the past consume the present they'd built together. "Girls," Minho said quietly as his father approached. "This is your grandfather, my father." Kang Sung-min had dressed simply for the occasion. No business suit, no symbols of the power he had wielded for decades. Just an elderly man in a sweater and slacks, leaning on a cane, his face lighting with an emotion Minho had rarely seen there. Wonder. "Hello," he said, his English careful but clear. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." The girls, raised with manners that bridged cultures, bowed slightly, a gesture Minho had taught them as a connection to their Korean heritage. Mina, always the spokesperson, stepped forward first. "It's nice to meet you, grandfather," she said formally. "I'm Mina. These are my sisters, Jia and Sora." What followed was surreal in its normalcy. A conversation between an elderly man and 3 curious children, guided carefully by parents watchful for any signs of manipulation or inappropriate revelations. They talked of simple things, school, hobbies, favorite foods. The girls showed him their various interests: Mina's science journal, Jia's photography portfolio, Sora's collection of rocks gathered from beaches across the Pacific Northwest. Minho watched his father with the triplets, noting how differently he interacted with them than he ever had with Minho himself. There was a gentleness there, a patience, an interest in them as people rather than as extensions of legacy. Perhaps it was age or illness, or the knowledge that these relationships had no future beyond this single meeting. Or perhaps it was growth, the hard-won wisdom that came from losing everything he had once valued. When the moment came for gifts, Minho tensed, anticipating extravagance, bribery disguised as generosity. Instead, his father presented each girl with one of the jade pendants from the wooden box, identical pieces that had traveled through generations to reach them. These belonged to your great-grandmother and her mother before her, he explained as the girls examined the smooth green stones with appropriate awe. They survived war and poverty and displacement. They are symbols of resilience, of survival, of the strength of women in our family. Jia, the most sensitive of the three, looked up at him with eyes that missed nothing. Are you really dying? The bluntness of the question seemed to startle even Kang Sung-min. Yes, he answered after a moment. I am. Are you afraid? She pressed, ignoring Zara's gentle attempt to redirect the conversation. Sometimes, he admitted with an honesty that shocked Minho. Not of death itself, but of what I'm leaving behind. Of the mistakes I've made that can never be corrected. Like with Dad. Sora interjected, protective as always. Kang Sung-min met his granddaughter's challenging gaze with respect. Yes, like with your father. The admission hung in the air between them all, acknowledgement of wrongs that could never be fully righted, of damage that could never be completely undone, of a relationship fractured beyond repair. I made many mistakes with your father, he continued, speaking to the girls but looking at Minho. I taught him the wrong lessons about what matters, about what makes a man successful, about what family should mean. Minho felt Zara's hand tighten on his shoulder, anchoring him as unexpected emotions threatened to surface. This was not the father he had known. The unyielding patriarch who measured worth by power, who viewed emotion as weakness, who had shaped his son into a weapon to extend his own reach. But he learned better lessons on his own, his father concluded. He became a better man than I taught him to be, a better father than I ever was. That's something to be proud of, even if I can't take credit for it. The afternoon continued with stories, carefully selected tales of Minho's childhood, of family history that predated the criminal empire, of the grandmother the girls had never known. Boundaries were respected. No mention of the business, the power, the violence that had defined the Kang legacy in Seoul. Just the connecting threads of family, of shared blood, of history that belonged to these three girls regardless of their father's choices. As the meeting drew to its agreed-upon end, Kang Sung-min stood with obvious effort, his body betraying the pain he refused to acknowledge. Thank you, he said simply, for this gift, for allowing me to meet you, for carrying our family forward in ways I never could. He bowed to them, not the slight, formal nod of greeting, but a deep bow of respect that cost him physically. Then he turned to Minho and Zara, his expression solemn. You've built something precious, he said quietly. Something worth more than everything I spent my life accumulating. Protect it. Cherish it. Don't make the mistakes I made. With those words, he departed as he had arrived, alone, a man facing the end of his journey with nothing but the knowledge that something of his blood would continue, even if nothing of his empire remained. The family watched him go, the girls subdued, processing the complexity of meeting a grandfather who would never be part of their lives beyond this single afternoon. Is he really never coming back? Jia asked, her artistic soul always sensitive to the finality of goodbyes. No, Minho answered gently. He's not. Because he's dying? Or because you don't want him to? Mina's question cut to the heart of the matter, as her questions often did. Both, Minho admitted. Some relationships can't be fixed. Some distances can't be bridged. But that doesn't mean we can't acknowledge the connections that exist anyway. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, their jade pendants carefully placed on bedside tables, Minho and Zara sat on their balcony, watching the moonlight dance across the water. "You did well today," Zara said softly. "Staying Michael, not becoming Kang Minho again. It was harder than I expected," he admitted. Seeing him like that, diminished mortal, hearing him acknowledge his mistakes, even indirectly. "Do you regret agreeing to the meeting?" Minho considered the question carefully, as he had learned to do in their years together. "No," he said finally. "The girls deserved to know that part of themselves, even if they'll never fully understand what it means. And I needed to see him as he is now, not as the towering figure from my memory. And the trusts? The money? This had been the most difficult decision, whether to accept or reject the financial legacy his father had arranged. In the end, pragmatism had won over principle. The trusts would remain, but with conditions Minho had insisted upon. The funds would be accessible only for education, for creative pursuits, for charitable foundations the girls might establish as adults. Never for business ventures, never for power, never for the kind of empire their grandfather had built. "They'll decide what to do with that inheritance when they're old enough to understand what it means," Minho answered. "Just as they'll decide what parts of their heritage to embrace and what parts to leave behind." Zara's hand found his in the darkness, their fingers intertwining in the familiar pattern of years together. "You know what impressed me most today? Watching you with him, seeing how far you've come from the man who left me in Boston. How completely you've chosen a different path than the one he laid out for you." "I had something worth changing for," Minho replied, thinking of the 3 sleeping girls upstairs and the woman beside him. "Something worth more than empire." As they sat together in comfortable silence, Minho felt the weight of the past lightning. Not gone entirely, never that, but transformed into something he could carry without being crushed by it. The legacy he had rejected and the legacy he had chosen existed side by side now, not in conflict but in conversation, each informing the other. He thought of his father returning to Seoul to face his final days. Alone but for the memory of 3 granddaughters, he would never know beyond this single meeting. He thought of the jade pendants that had traveled through generations to reach his daughters, connecting them to a heritage they would understand more fully as they grew. He thought of the path that had brought him here, from Seoul to Boston to Vancouver, from crime lord to father, from Kang Minho to Michael Kim. 5 years ago, he had fled Seoul to protect his family from his father's world. Today, he had allowed that world to touch them briefly on their terms, not as a threat but as a connection, a piece of history they had the right to know. The revelation of his children had once detonated like a bomb in his carefully ordered existence. Now they were the center around which his world revolved, the legacy that mattered more than empire, the future that justified every sacrifice. Whatever came next, however his father's final days played out, whatever choices his daughters made as they grew, whatever challenges awaited their family, Minho knew with absolute certainty that he had found his way home. Not to Seoul, not to the Kang Empire, but to this balcony overlooking the Pacific, to the woman whose hand he held in the darkness, to the 3 sleeping girls who carried his blood without the burden of his sins. Not the legacy his father had intended, perhaps, but the only one worth preserving.